having a genuine connection or trying to establish that has been my way to kind of network in a way that feels comfortable and not as icky to me. There have just been so many examples this year of opportunities that I've had just from making these connections with people.
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory Podcast. I'm Kim Skorupski. On today's episode of the Triple H, the Habits and Hacks from Hopkins, we have Dr. Dionna Williams. Why don't you start, Dionna, with telling people who you are and what you do here at Hopkins? Great.
So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Molecular and Comparative Pathobiology. I run a research lab, and we work on HIV and how it impacts brain function. We're particularly interested in things like cognition and mental health, and we look at some of the cellular and molecular mechanisms by which HIV impacts these systems. So we look at the immune response as a really big component, blood-brain barrier alterations, changes in metabolism, and also the role of HIV therapeutics, known as ART, or antiretroviral therapies, and how they may benefit or sometimes adversely impact brain health. In addition to the research, I do some teaching through different graduate programs, and then also I teach a summer course for high school students that are interested in medical careers. In addition to that, I serve as the co-director of the Central Nervous System SWIG, or Scientific Working Group, for the Center for AIDS Research. So we're a group of faculty, students, trainees that are very interested in HIV brain complications. Some people are new to HIV, some people are established, and the really great thing is we all work together from very different disciplines. Some people are statisticians, public health people doing health disparities work, psychologists, all kinds of backgrounds coming together to answer very difficult questions. And it's really collaborative and a lot of fun.
Oh, Dr. Williams, I am just so impressed. I learned so much from these podcasts, and I just learned something from you. I had no idea you taught high school students. Thank you so much for doing that. That is such a wonderful effort. I love hearing about our faculty who are so invested in our Baltimore community, and so thanks for doing that. We know that pipeline is so important. And
exactly.
I also loved how you described the interdisciplinary nature of your work, because I'm also more and more, appreciative and understanding of diversity in all of its facets, age and field, and every component of diversity. It just becomes so obvious that all of our strengths just improve what we do. So thank you so much for what you're doing and for describing your work. In this series, we've been learning a lot and listening to our colleagues about different things that they've done, or practices, routines, habits, thought processes that they attribute to their success and being able to navigate this challenging career in academic medicine. And I know you have something really unique to share with everyone today, so I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you. So why don't you tell folks what is your wonderful news that you can share with us and the interesting habits and hacks that you've developed?
Great, yeah. I think there are kind of two main things that have emerged that have been really helpful for my career. One of the first dates back to when I was a small child. I've been doing it kind of forever, I think. And it's simply just planning ahead. I'm kind of a person that plans maybe too much, depending upon who you ask.
Is there such a thing?
Right, exactly. But I really, really plan stuff out a year or two in advance. And I kind of backtrack where I want to be, and then kind of figure out what I need to do to get there. So, for instance, no one could have anticipated COVID hitting us last year to the magnitude that it did, and really just shutting everything down. And while it was an adjustment to having my research lab just not functional and, no one going in for so long, despite having no one in the lab, our productivity was actually increased last year compared to the previous year before. Not because of, anything I knew about COVID, but I had just planned on what I was going to do for that year. And thankfully, I could still manage to get it all done. So I had already planned upon which grants I was going to apply for the year before. I had a big lab meeting with my entire group. Every year we do this, where I discuss our plans for the next year and our goals, and people that we want to hire, bring to the team, the grants we want to apply for, the papers we want to get out, So I'd already planned on these grants to apply for. The papers, some of which are already in progress. And once we heard around February that, COVID was beginning to hit the U.S. a little bit more than we anticipated, we kind of focused on getting our final experiments done so we can write from home in case that was the case, and that turned out to be the case. And then once COVID did hit, I was able to collaborate with one of my co-directors of the CNS WIG I mentioned before, Leah Rubin in neurology, and we spent the year just analyzing existing data that we had already had, and collaborating with others, and we were able to get out 10 papers last year, between last year and now, and 3 of them I'm either first or senior author. And then also last year, because of the planning for the grants, I was able to secure my first R1, which was so exciting, especially given COVID. I secured an internal pilot from the CFAR here, an administrative supplement, and another small grant from a foundation. So it was such an incredible year because I had plans and kind of knew what I wanted to get done. And so I think those skills really come in handy. Like I've mentioned, I've been doing this since a small child, planning out like for my summers after the school year, having summer breaks and planning out what I was going to learn each day so I wouldn't fall behind. I was doing that in kindergarten. So it's definitely a personality trait, but I also think it's a skill that can be taught. And as long as you're consistent, it really, really pays off.
Well, I think you're preaching to the choir here, because I am a high J in the Myers-Briggs myself. I love nothing more than an agenda or a schedule. I'll come home, at the end of a day, or back in the olden days when I used to go out of my house, I would actually, midday, I'm thinking back and laughing to myself, I would come home on a Saturday afternoon, which would normally, and not back in the olden days, not a working day, but I would come home on a Saturday afternoon, go backwards on my day and make a list of all the things that I was going to do, because I just love seeing the things that I had done and being able to put that check mark next to the items. And I love always, what am I going to do? What am I going to do every day? I need to have that sense of structure and order, and it helps me process things, and it helps me be efficient. And so the way you described it, being the same since a child, and I'm, again, the same, I'm equally curious how someone like you, who's very planful, even though you said, you had planned on submitting this for this grant, applying for that grant, clearly you were going to write papers anyway. This big, throwing this loop into our lives, this, out of left field ball, how were you also then able to pivot somewhat from, going out away from the lab and not panic? So I appreciate, the orderliness and this being scheduled and organized, but can you also describe then how someone like you or like us is able to then be somewhat spontaneous and to recalibrate and not like spiral out of control when we don't have control? How did you manage that, having choice and control in an environment where there's seemingly no choice and no control?
Definitely. I think, you make a fantastic point. You're right. It's awesome to plan and think things through many steps ahead. But of course, life happens and plans get messed up. And I think for me, one of the biggest things that I've had to learn how to handle over the years is just accepting that things happen and not, questioning it, not being upset about it, just acknowledging that this is the case, and then repivoting and thinking about how can I make a new plan to move forward. So I always still have a plan in mind, and that helps me not be as maybe fearful of change or, having a hard time adapting. So I recalibrate to make a new plan. And I weigh the factors. So for us, when the lab shut down, I met with all the lab members and I said, what do you need to get done? What can we get done? What have you been wanting to do that you weren't able to do because you're busy with experiments? And it was so fantastic because people were going to, work on making this protocol that took so long that they couldn't have done before, or they really wanted to read papers that they never had time for. And for me, I took a lot of time to make sure that I really was able to mentor people to kind of help develop the skills that they may have needed, which is much harder remotely to some extent. But because we had so much time that wasn't spent doing experiments, we could really prioritize those things. And I think that worked to our huge advantage because now that everyone is back in the lab, they're very focused and they know exactly what they need to get done because they could take that time they needed to kind of regroup and accomplish some goals they weren't able to do otherwise. Yeah. And in terms of me, I guess, thinking about how I replanned my year, I kind of spent that time doing the same thing. I really thought about what I wanted the lab to accomplish and thought about the big picture. So for me, I took the time to think about things I never really do because they can be overwhelming. So I thought about budgeting, which is really, really tricky for a lab, for me at least. I'm great with personal finances, but thinking about millions of dollars in 5 years, that's a little bit harder. And so I thought about what I wanted the lab to look like, who I wanted to hire, at what year I wanted to hire them, speaking with my administrators to figure out, do I have to budget for this? When can I hire them? Those kinds of things. And then also I thought about the projects I wanted in the lab and what funding I needed to secure so we could have each of those projects kind of achieved. And so now I have a new plan based on that, wherein I'm going to be applying for another grant coming up in May, and then I'm going to apply for one more grant the following year. And fortunate enough to get them, those should really help secure our three main focuses in the group and have stable funding for the next few years because my startup funds will be running out shortly. And I wanted to make sure that we were really, really in a great spot to kind of move forward without any interruptions with productivity and also without losing the staff who are just so essential and we've invested so much time in and we want to make sure that we can keep them on. So I took the time to really plan that out, which normally I probably wouldn't have done to that magnitude because I would have been busy doing other things.
Right. So this is so critical. And you've said this a number of times, the word time. Time. And I think, you hate to talk about the COVID silver linings, but because of all the horror of the past year that we've gone through as a community, as a people, as a country, and yet time. So that being forced to slow down, to stop, to me, it further stresses the importance of the good old-fashioned concept of sabbatical. The idea of literally getting off the treadmill, retreating somewhere, or having at least headspace where you can dedicate to doing some deep thinking, strategic planning, thoughtful meetings with team members to prioritize, like you said. To me, the circumstance where a lot of us were forced to do these things is kind of like an aha moment to remind us, as are many events, big life events as we go through life, birth, death, marriage, childbirth. It really these events force us to re-examine. And I think what you're describing to me is just so, such a great example of using time and how important time is, that we just are so used to running. And then hopefully this is something that we can take forward and remind ourselves that no, this time spent thinking is just as valuable as doing. And so I think you've given a great example of how you turn something negative into a positive, and hopefully we don't forget that lesson, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's really changed how I think about running the lab now and kind of prioritizing all my responsibilities. And yeah, I'll definitely keep this moving forward. I think it's just been a tremendous benefit to, as you mentioned, just a very, very challenging year.
So I know you wanted to talk about something else. What else did you want to share with us?
Yeah, there was another thing that I was reflecting on, and a lot of people bring this topic up a lot, and I know it can be difficult for some people, but I really need to emphasize the importance of networking. And for me, networking was kind of difficult at first because I felt very uncomfortable just kind of going up to people, asking them for things, especially if they were strangers I hadn't met them before or famous scientists that I didn't know. But for me, I think having a genuine connection or trying to establish that has been my way to kind of network in a way that feels comfortable and not as icky to me. And so there have just been so many examples this year of opportunities that I've had just from making these connections with people that kind of just work their way back into your life. So, for example, a few years ago when I was trying to apply for faculty positions and wanting to develop those skills, I participated in faculty development leadership courses designed for postdocs. And so there was one sponsored by the NINDS, an R25 mechanism, and it was for senior postdoctoral fellows that wanted to become faculty. It gave you a mentor, a cohort of people with whom you could kind of network with and establish camaraderie. And we really got help with planning things out, thinking about our grants, things of that nature. Anyway, there was one participant in this program who at the time was also a postdoc as myself, and he was thinking about his career situation, what he wanted to do. We had kind of fallen out of touch for a little bit, but then he moved back to Maryland, and so we were able to reconnect. And just a few days ago, he reached out to me. I found out now that he is an SRO at NINDS, so he's a senior, I forget what the acronym stands for, but he's the person that organizes the study sections for different funding mechanisms.
The scientific review officer.
Thank you so much, Kim. Yes.
Gosh, you're kidding.
And he reached out to me and was like, "Hey, Dionna, would you mind serving on this review panel for me? I know you're a fantastic scientist, have great feedback, and being a new faculty member, it's a really, really big privilege and an honor to be asked to do this." And it just came from meeting him in this program, having a relationship, and when he moved back to the state, just kind of following up with him. And when he needed someone, he thought of me and reached out to me. And so it was just remarkable. And so for me, it shows how genuine relationships, which are kind of networking, right? But really just making sure that when I meet people, I try to interact with them in a way that feels comfortable to me, such that down the road, perhaps opportunities may come up that you may not have had otherwise. Yeah. And I've had many examples of this in my career. And it really just, I don't know, it's tremendous. Another example is, I'm sorry, Kim, please.
No, I'm sitting here so happy that you gave that example, that serendipitous thing that we sometimes think, oh, it's a coincidence. There are no such thing as coincidences. And I want to hear your next example, but I also want to emphasize what you just said, the authentic. And you mentioned earlier, like, especially for, introverts, that ickiness. You talked about it being this ick factor, like you feel like you're, hey, how you doing? Let me introduce myself. Let me tell you about myself. And that kind of, you just feel like you're really ingratiating yourself. And for us extroverts, we're like, that's our bread and butter. We love that ickiness where we get all in.
Exactly.
So, but I love that you found a way. Again, not saying that extroverts aren't authentic, because I feel very authentic, but I know I'm sometimes perceived as not being so. But I want to hear more after this next example of that. What is ickiness to you, and how do you do authentic? Like, how do you literally tell somebody out there who's like an introvert going, I don't even know how to begin enough. How would I even meet that guy to know? So give us your second example. I want to hear about it.
Perfect. So this happened actually as a graduate student. I met a program officer from NIDA at a conference. The conference had requested that NIH staff come to meet the trainees, and we had lunch together at a Meet the Mentor luncheon. And so each table had one person there. At my table was a program officer named Avila. And at the table, it was so interesting because there were a ton of other students and postdocs there, but no one was really talking. And once we did the go around the table, introduce yourselves, it was a little bit awkward. And for me, because I had been planning, thinking about my next steps, I knew that I wanted to apply for an F-32 as a postdoc. I knew that NIH had this program called the LRP, Loan Repayment Program, that pays back your student loans. I didn't know much about it, but I knew it existed. And I just kind of wanted to pick his brain. And so I would ask a question, wait for someone else to talk. No one did. And so I asked my next question. And after a while, it was just me speaking to him with everyone else around. And apparently, it was very impressive to him. I just wanted to get my questions answered, and I thought it was a great opportunity. He was impressed. He reached out to me a few months later to speak at a panel at a conference he was going to. And pretty much since graduate school, we've had a prolonged professional relationship. He's just been tremendous. He's connected me with mentors, people to help review my grants. He's helped me be interviewed on the NIDA website. I've been in programming that he's sponsored, won travel awards to go to Society for Neuroscience. I mean, just so many opportunities. I go to NIDA every year to give a talk to the trainees because he's organizing it. And it was just this interaction back in like 2010 where I just had some questions I wanted to ask. And so for me, it was very genuine because I didn't expect to get anything out of it. I just knew he had answers for me and I wanted to get them answered. And since no one else was talking, I figured, well, I might as well go for it myself.
So not only did he turn out to be a mentor, but also a coach and a sponsor.
Exactly.
And I like how you described that you just had the courage. Again, I'm thinking of sitting at a lunch table. Maybe some people are thinking, I don't know this guy. I don't know anybody around me. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to, or I don't even know how to start this, but you got the ball rolling. I almost envision this as being, you were helping the other students and trainees around the table by asking questions that I'm sure they valued, gained a lot of information from. So he saw you taking that leadership opportunity, but being polite and authentic. And so I'm sure that's what he saw in you. And clearly that was borne out by the opportunities that he helped provide to you over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us more about that ickiness thing. I want to hear more about like what you see and feel from your perspective going, oh, that's not me. I could never do that. So other people listening can say, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's two main things. One of the ones is kind of just trying too hard to connect with this, this person who you don't know. And like small talk, I really don't like small talk. I can talk about a lot of stuff, but just random like, oh, that sure was a good lunch we had at, yesterday at the conference. Like that is really uncomfortable for me. And so when I would see people doing it, I thought that's how you network, and I tried it, and it just came off, at least for me, not good. It didn't lead to any real conversations. Those people didn't remember me later on, and it was really not a good way to kind of connect to people. Yeah. So in addition to that, the other way that's icky is kind of feeling like the used car salesman. Right. I really don't like the feeling of being sold to when I go buy a new car. And that's kind of how I feel networking can be sometimes, because I'm trying to sell them that, I'm worth paying attention to, I'm worth investing in, I'm really great. And really, I think it's just speaking to them just as a human being, realizing that, we all have things we care about in science, outside of science, and just trying to find what those things are and what relates to me. It just helped me feel much more comfortable, and it didn't feel as, icky or gross. It just felt like I was talking to someone who happened to be very influential in my field.
Rather than, sometimes in our leadership courses, we say, practice the elevator speech in your pitch or think about your mantra. And some of that can come off as being like the game show host of, drum roll, and you're doing a quick, ta-da, and trying to be, emote and act. And you feel like, that cheapening sense of like, do you like me now? Do you like me now? Am I shiny and glitzy?
Right.
Grabbing your attention enough? And it's just so kind of like, you're like, really? It's exhausting to try to sell yourself, and it just feels bad.
Mm-hmm. And I just found it's not a memorable interaction for me or for them, because I reached back out to them, and it's clear that they're being polite and they'll speak with me, but they do not recall meeting me ever. And so I just got rid of that, and I just try to find something, that we maybe not even have in common, just find out what they're interested in, and if I have anything to talk about it, and I can kind of open up. One example was someone in my field who I met as a student. I thought his work was just always so outstanding. And finally, at one conference, he came up to my poster, and we began speaking, and he asked me, like, wow, you're really busy, what do you do to have fun? And I mentioned that I really like going to the gym, I like martial arts. And it turns out that he did the same martial art that I did. And so we literally now, every conference after, I'm just so happy to see him. And we get to talk about, going to the gym and, I learned this new punching technique. And it's a genuine interaction. I saw him randomly at NIH one time. And I went up to him, "Oh my gosh, so good to see you. How are you doing?" And then he ended up inviting me to give a seminar at his institution because I happened to see him. So that's a great example of just a genuine, interaction that has turned into something that's a good CV booster and also a good relationship as well.
And I'm so glad you're sharing these personal stories, because it is the ick factor is not only on our part as the mentee, early career, the person who's looking for something, but it's also the ick factor on their side. They also feel that sense of, oh, here we go, game on. Okay, I'll play or not play. And I like the example I gave a couple years ago when I started doing this podcast was I wouldn't even call him my mentor back then, but it was Fred Walensky was my hero in sociology and aging and gerontology. When I would go to my conferences, wherever he was talking, I was always there. I would just sit there and admire him. He was so smart, just would communicate just perfectly. His writing was so clear, and I just really admired his brain and his manner, his affect, which is calm, so unlike me, just calm and cool, and quiet and chill. And I admired him so much. And I went to an event one evening that one of the institutions was hosting, and there he was. And I was like, oh, it's Fred Walensky. And I was so nervous. And I kind of went to that. Now, mind you, again, I'm an extrovert, so I can talk to anybody. But I was so nervous. I so wanted to impress him and make him think that I was smart and I knew stuff. And I saddle up next to him at the food bar where the food was sitting, and he made a comment about the cookies, and we started talking about cookies, and he was arguing about Hydrox cookies, and I said, never heard of Hydrox. You got to go for the double stuffed Oreos. He's like, no, Hydrox is better than double stuffed Oreos. We ended up spending like 10 minutes talking about cookies, and I remember then somebody grabbed him and pulled away, and I'm like, I cannot believe I just blew my opportunity with Fred Walensky talking about cookies. But do you know that every time I'd see him at a conference, I'd say, hey, Hydrox. He'd say, hey, Oreo. And we would just get into it. And didn't I end up getting my one of my best jobs before I came to Hopkins was at Rush University Medical Center. I got that job because Dr. Fred Walensky said, oh, you're going to Chicago? Well, you need to talk to Dr. Dennis Evans. He's right over there. He's just walking out of the room. That tall guy there. Go talk to him. And I went up to Dr. Evans and said, hey, Fred Walensky told me I should talk to you. I'll move to Chicago. Boom. Got a job. And that to me is boom, got the job at Hopkins. So I attribute most all of my success in life to a conversation about cookies.
It is so true. That's really just how it happens.
Yeah.
I think, one thing we may miss now with our virtual conferences is kind of these casual interactions.
Yes.
I've met people and connected with them over, like, we both wanted the same honey jar, and it was the last one when we had tea, or just all kinds of things. These little interactions are really good opportunities to connect with people, and it just may lead to a really fantastic opportunity down the line.
But you're driving home just a basic point that we're all humans, and sometimes if you just kind of relax, take that breath, and find a place to connect personally as well as professionally, that will be such equally endearing and connecting. Is that how I see you, you see me. Yeah, we're both at this conference, so clearly we have an interest in HIV, and also I like Taekwondo. Get out, me too. So that
exactly.
That really just cements a relationship. And talk about memorable. Yeah, you're that one. I know you. You're special because we share the same XYZ. Yeah.
Exactly.
I do kind of worry about connecting, and in faculty development, what you just said, that whole networking, and my whole mission is to build community. So yeah, definitely sitting here in my basement as I talk to you all alone, and worrying about other faculty who are all alone and don't have those in-person opportunities anymore. But apparently there's software out there, and I was noodling around just yesterday, spatial.chat and gather.town. Those are both, looks like cool things, and we're in the office checking into those as it's kind of like a breakout room in Zoom, but it's more interactive, I guess, spatial.chat and gather.town, where you can go and just have these conversations with folks, like the old water cooler, coffee break kind of concept. So I'm always looking for opportunities to build community, but you're exactly right. You've given such great examples of how networking organically and naturally and just being yourself can open up doors that will be fulfilling not only in our careers, but also personally. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Well, folks, this has been Dr. Dionna Williams. I'm sure you have appreciated the conversation as much as I have and enjoyed and learned a lot from her. Dionna, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Kim. I'm really happy to be here and excited and happy to share some little nuggets that I've learned that have really been helpful for me, and I hope others find them helpful for themselves as well.
I know they will. And in fact, I just made a note to myself. I would love to have you come back and talk to us about grant writing, because I'm getting more and more requests of people who want to learn about grant writing in detail. We've done a couple episodes, but I would love to have you come back and maybe just noodle around some recommendations for how to write a really, a great specifics aims page, or any lessons you've learned about all your wild success, especially on the heels of your new R01. So maybe I can talk to you offline. We'll get you on back on the Faculty Factory podcast. What do you think?
That sounds perfect. I'd be delighted to come back.
Oh, good. See, you heard it here, folks. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us in the Faculty Factory podcast. Tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye, everybody. Bye, Dionna.
Bye, Kim.
Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.